Okay, so we're going to get started, and I just realized I never passed out the sheets. So hold on, I'll pause and I'll come around and pass out the sheets for you, and then we'll go. Okay, sorry about that. So we're going to work on an interior night rendering. So we did the interior day rendering last class. We're going to move into doing the interior night rendering, which isn't that much different. The idea is that most everything is already set up. The lights are already on. Everything should be fine. The big difference is we're switching the outside from being day to night. So I actually won't end up talking that long today, which is a good thing because it gives you a lot of time to work, which is what you all need right now going toward the final. So that's an excellent thing, and I'm going to give you that time. I will pass out grade sheets today because this week is the last week to withdraw. I guess on Friday is the last week to withdraw with a W in the class. For some reason, going through the grades, a lot of you missed parts of the last assignment in 103, or like you didn't post the STL or the G code, or you didn't post the unrolled surface, or maybe you posted it as an exercise, but it wasn't tagged as an assignment, and so there's some issues. So if the grade on the grade sheet isn't where you want it to be, chances are something like that happened. And so what I'm going to ask that you do if that happens is just make a new post with it in it and say regrade on it, and that way I know that we missed it. I'll go back, I'll fix it, and we'll update it because it was pretty. There's a lot of people that missed something, and so and I'm not looking at any one person. I don't know who it was, but I know in the grading there was a lot of zeros. So anyway, food for thought. If you're in that category, let's just make sure you get it so that we have it going forward. So we're going to work on our interior rendering. I pulled up my file from last class. Actually, I switched files. I went to the coast instead of the mountain setting because I told you I'd flip back and forth between them. I did a little quick test render to make sure all of my lights were working. They're still working in the file, which is good. And obviously, as we look out through the windows, that's the daytime setting because we can see blue skies and that coming through. We need to switch into the night settings. When we switch into the night settings, a couple things happen. One, obviously, the outside gets much darker, though typically it doesn't go away completely. It's not pitch black because parts of the light spill out onto the scene. Likewise, there's usually a little bit of moonlight or starlight that gives some illumination, but most of the light outside is dark. The other thing that happens is we have less light on the inside of our scene. So places where the sunlight actually comes into the building go away. So we typically need a little bit more light than we had before. And so I am going to do a little bit of extra light just so you can see it. And I'll repeat myself next class with the rectangular lights just so that we get some exposure to them as well. Thus far, we've done spotlights and point lights primarily. Sometimes rectangular lights just kind of are the right setup. And so the rectangular lights that I'm going to do today, I'm going to underlight the stairs so that they have little lights on the lips of the stairs. I'm going to create a new layer for that, and we'll call this stair lights, if I can type. There we go. I'll make that the current layer, and then what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to zoom in on the stairs here, and I will create, instead of a spotlight or a point light, I'm going to create the rectangular light, which is this one. Now, the reason I've hesitated with the rectangular lights is it's a little bit harder to predict what the correct wattage is because it's based on the size of the light. So if the light's bigger, you need more watts because the light's bigger, and so if it's going to shine. So there's a few intricacies to picking it, and some of it will involve basically guessing and checking. So I'm going to go ahead and snap, it says rectangular light corner. I'm going to snap to the corner of this first stair. Rectangular light length will go all the way across until it hopefully snaps. Come on. You know what, I'm going to create it one more up because it's not working for me here. We'll go on that edge to that edge. There we go. And then this, I only need a little bit here, so I might type in maybe 2 inches or so because I only need that front lip of the stairs. So maybe like that. Hold down Shift to keep it in plane, and there it is. So the rectangular light, when it's created, is a rectangle and it has a little vector on it. If the vector is pointing in the wrong direction, which in this case it's most definitely pointing in the wrong direction, I need to flip it to the other direction. And I can do that by just typing flip, apparently, if I can type it correctly. There we go. And the direction vector will go the opposite direction. That means it's shining down. Same rules apply, though, because I don't want the object itself to be coplanar with one of my, or the light to be coplanar with one of my objects. So I'm going to move it ever so slightly below my stair tread, something like that. Let's look at the light properties here. So I'll come back over to my properties window. I'm going to click on the light properties. We'll go through the same basic settings. So first thing would be the color, 255, 214, and 170. Oops. Told you I can't type today. And there it is. My units are going to be in watts. And I'm going to start out, somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 40 based on that size. That's a guess. I have to check it a little bit. So below the intensity settings, there's some different options here. A couple things. Do we want it to be double-sided? Is it shining both directions at once, or is it just shining the direction of the vector? I'm not going to check that because I want it just shining the direction of the vector. Is the light itself invisible? This is the only light in V-Ray where you can actually see the rectangle when it's on. So I tend to turn it invisible because we're dealing with the light settings, and you would probably have a fixture there anyway. So I go ahead and check the box for invisible. We're going to leave it with decay on. The rest of this is all fine. It's not a dead bulb because I've got values here in the sampling, so all should be good. So at this point, it's time to do a quick test render and to see if it's actually on and if the wattage is about right. So in my V-Ray options under my output, I have a small size, and we can go ahead and test that to see if it's on. Yep, looks like it's doing its job. It's shining light on the step. All of that's good. The wattage might need to go up just a little bit to fine tune it, but my guess wasn't too bad. So I might change that, and we'll go up a little bit. Let's try 60. That seems pretty good. Now it's a matter of copying it to the rest of the stairs. So I'll go ahead and type copy, and we'll snap to that front edge, and I'll work my way up the rest of the stairs. Come on. Being very unhappy on that last stair. Okay, so there are all of those little lights. In reality, I should put them up on this set of stairs, but I'm not going to make you guys watch me do that. I already have my little piece of furniture. The rest of the lights are all in the scene. That's good. I can go to my set view. I have two interior render views set up. That one's the first one, and I went ahead last class and I set up a second one. If I go to set view, the interior render 2, that's up in this room looking out that way. So I've got two different views to do my test renders to see which one I like a little bit better. I'm going to go back to that first one, so I'll go to set view, interior render 1. There we go. That's going to be the one that I'm going to render. Now I need to go through and double check my settings for switching over into night view. As I said earlier in the semester, I think the sunset views are kind of hybrids. So if you really want to do a sunset view here, that would be okay with me because it's kind of a night view. There's a lot of lighting that's required in the sunset view, but you can also pick the full night view. Under the Resources tab, under the V-Ray Quick Rendering Setups, if we scroll down here, I have two different basic night scenes. Night scene 1 and night scene 2. I also have some sunset scenes. I think this sunset scene 2 definitely qualifies as night because the sun is actually off, but you get some nice glow to it. So you guys can play around with whichever one you want. I'm going to do a true night scene. I'll use the basic night scene 1 for today's purposes. I already have the HDRI background. That's already there. Now to get all of these settings I'm going to go ahead and download the VisOpt file down here at the bottom. That'll preload all the V-Ray settings for me. I'm going to right-click on it and say Save Link As, and save it. I'll just put it on the desktop for right now. I believe I already have this file anyway. So I've saved it as. Now, if you click on it, it gives you like an XML file, so you don't want that. So you remember, right-click to save on that VisOpt file. And so I already have, if I'm going back to my master site here, I already have a pretty good daytime setup. And so in a week, when I want to go back and re-render the daytime setup, I don't want to have to re-input any information. I don't want to have to recreate it. So I'm going to save that day that day setup for myself. So I'm already here. I can click on the Save Disk in the V-Ray Option Editor. There it is. And I'm going to save this in my folder. And so this was spring. OK, and this is going to be, it's not the Tahoe because this one is the coast. I'll say ocean, day, VisOpt, backup. OK, so the advantage here is that once I switch to night, if I want to go back to day, I just have to reload this group of settings. And it's going to bring back the daytime settings. And I don't have to do anything other than turn the sun off. We'll get to that. So I'm going to go ahead and call this the ocean day. I'll save it. And then all of my settings are saved. At this point, I can go ahead and load in the night settings. So I'll go ahead to my load options. And I'm going to choose the night settings. In my flash drive, I have resources, I have V-Ray, I have HDRI, I have night HDRI, and it was right here. This was the one that I had downloaded. Again, you can pick any one of them, or you could do your own if you wanted to. And I will go ahead and I'll open up that grouping of settings. So that's good. That settings were loaded. A couple things I have to make sure. In the environment, I have to make sure that my maps are tied correctly. So we'll go ahead in the reflection and refraction background, click the capital M, and make sure that I can get to the HDRI background image. Go into my resources, into V-Ray, HDRI, nights, Milky Way. There it is. It was this one. And I'll say OK. And then I'll go to my, oh, I already did that one. Sorry. I'll go to this one. And it was the light. There we go. Both of those are loaded. I'm going to go to my output. I'm going to unlock it and get my current view aspect so I get the exact view. What I see is what I get. I'll lock it again. And then I'm going to drop the size way down. So we'll do a height of maybe 100. And that's a pretty good setup. Under my system settings, I want to make sure distributed rendering is turned off for right now because I'm doing a small test render. Remember, if you're doing a small render, it takes more time to do distributed rendering. If you're doing a large render, then it's beneficial. So this is slow, or this is a small render, so I'm not going to do it. I will close that, and I'll go ahead and open up a render. And I can already tell by this blue that I missed something, and that was turning off the sun. So I'm going to go back to my layers, and I should have a layer called sun that I can actually turn off. There we go. Now it should be the true night render. So let me bring that rendering back up. And we'll try this again. And I can already tell the places where the windows are. That's dark. That's a good sign. So I know it's always a little painful to wait, but this happens for me and for you. So I'll go ahead and I'll pause it. We'll let it go a little bit. You guys can work, and then I'll tell you as soon as it's done. This is going to become more commonplace because the renderings take time, and I don't want to waste your time quite so much. Okay, so it just finished. I think it's possible that my lights were turned up a little too high on the stairs. They're looking a little too bright, so I would go back and select them and drop them down. They're more light than I wanted them to be. The other thing is the overall exposure might be a little bit bright, which is certainly something that can happen. That would be adjusted in the V-Ray camera settings here. Instead of having a shutter speed of 100, maybe I'd change that to 150. So you make a few subtle adjustments going forward. Once I have this set up the way that I want it, and I'm happy with the overall setup, that now would be time to turn back on the distributed rendering. So just in review, I would turn on, click on the system drawer, turn on the distributed rendering. I need to load up some hosts, which I don't have any here. Remember, you can get your own by clicking on Find Servers, but that's not the most helpful thing in the world because it's still only yours. To get the IP addresses for the lab here, and I show you this part because if you were in the other lab, the numbers would be different. We're going to look for the command line, so CMD to bring up the command prompt, and then IP config. And we're looking for this address right there, 10.24.199.3. That's my personal computer's address here. And so we're going to go ahead and do the same thing, 10.24.199. Anywhere between 1 and 33, I believe. So we'll take this first one. I'm actually going to copy that first part, make it a little bit easier to add. We'll do 12 and 15 and how about 19? Okay, I'll check all these to turn them on. I'll click on Resolve Servers so that the addresses all show up here, and I'll say OK. Hopefully V-Ray doesn't crash. That's a good thing. At that point, I could go back and I could add a few more. Let me add a few more. We'll add 22 and 25 and maybe 31. I'll say OK. So somewhere in that neighborhood is a pretty good number. I'll go ahead and click on Resolve Servers again, say OK again. There we go. So distributed rendering is turned on, and that'll speed up my render time quite a bit. I'm going to come down to my output. It's time to increase that size. Remember, it's 300 pixels for every inch that you end up wanting to print. But for our purposes right now, I'll do my height at 1080. All right, there you go. So that's ready. My output's ready. My VFB channels should already be turned on if they were last class. Remember, I told you to turn those on. I have RGB color, alpha, diffuse reflection, shadow, lighting, render ID, material ID, Z depth, and background all turned on. Remember, it doesn't take anything extra for V-Ray to create these channels for you. You're just turning them on so that they show up. And that's great for collage work after the fact in Photoshop, should you need it. OK, so the rest of that is all set. We will, by the way, a little bit later in the semester, talk about what the Z-depth settings really mean and how you can adjust them and get better results out of them. But for right now, we just leave it turned on. All of our options are fine. I'm ready to go ahead and do that final rendering. So I'm going to go ahead and let it render so you guys can see the end result. But I want you guys to work during the process, so there's no reason not to start working. So I'll pause the recording, I'll do the render, and then I'll show you guys at the very end. OK? OK, so just to finish off what I was talking about here, this was the final render. Once I let it run out, it actually looks better on my screen than it does on the projector. It looks too light on the projector. The only thing I wanted to do was remind you that when you're done, make sure you click the multiple disc icon so that you save all the views. And then you will end up just posting the night view. So I just wanted to remind you on that. Click the views. You can cycle through the various channels by going through here so you can see what the various channels are giving you. Of course, the ones I'm picking are not showing much. There you go, so you can see what each one would do in Photoshop, but that option there saves all of them, and that's the important thing for you guys to know as you go forward. Other than that, I'll be quiet. You guys keep working.